The 90s were a golden era for wrestling games, marking a revolution in the genre that perfectly captured the explosion of professional wrestling's popularity at the time. During this epic decade, developers like THQ, Acclaim, and Midway created true masterpieces that set the standards for all wrestling games that came after. In this special list, we'll revisit the 10 most remarkable titles that made history on consoles and arcades, from the first revolutionary experiences on Nintendo to the impressive technical advances of the original PlayStation. When I think of WWF WrestleMania, the arcade game, I immediately remember that unique feeling of playing something completely out of the curve in the world of wrestling games. Released by Midway in 1995, this title represented a radically different approach from what we expected from a professional wrestling game at the time. It was as if someone had taken the Mortal Kombat formula and decided to apply it to the WWF universe, creating an experience that was both familiar to fighting game fans and completely crazy by traditional wrestling standards. The gameplay was where the title really shined and at the same time divided opinions. The round-based combat system, inspired by traditional fighting games, transformed each fight into a frenetic and unpredictable experience. The 2-on-1 and 3-on-1 handicap matches during the championship mode created a brutal difficulty that tested not only reflexes, but also the ability to manage resources and timing of special moves. It was frustrating and addictive at the same time. You died repeatedly, but always came back for just one more try because the gameplay was genuinely fun, even if it was completely unrealistic. The visual aspect of the game was impressive by 1995 standards, utilizing the scanning technology that Midway had perfected with Mortal Kombat. The fluid animations and exaggerated special effects created a visual spectacle that perfectly captured the sports entertainment of the WWF. However, this same visual approach that seemed revolutionary at the time ended up being one of the reasons why the game aged poorly. The digitized graphics that seemed photorealistic in 1995 today seem dated and strange. It's interesting how the technology that seemed to be the future of video games became a time capsule that reminds us exactly when the game was made. When I remember WWF Raw for SNES, I immediately think of that feeling of experiencing the height of wrestling games from the 16-bit era. Released in 1994, Raw represented the natural evolution of the sculptured software trilogy, arriving after Super WrestleMania and Royal Rumble to finally deliver what fans expected. This was definitely the moment when the series found its rhythm. It had the best roster in the franchise until then, with practically all the big names from the WWF at the time, including for the first time a female wrestler, Luna Vachon. Seeing characters like Undertaker, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon, and even Doink the Clown digitized relatively accurately by the standards of the time was genuinely exciting. What strikes me most about Raw is how it managed to perfectly capture the spirit of the WWF's new generation era. The game's presentation was impressive for 1994, with a decent recreation of the Monday Night Raw opening within the limitations of the SNES, and that selection screen with the VHS theme that was pure 90s nostalgia. Each wrestler had their theme music playing during the selection, and although some were questionable, like Diesel's, which was literally just truck engine noises, most managed to convey the characters' personalities. Seeing Vince McMahon and Jerry the King Lawler commentating before the fights and gesturing in the ring during the matches added a layer of authenticity that really made you feel like you were watching the show. Raw's gameplay was where the game really showed its evolution compared to its predecessors. Although it was still fundamentally a button masher, there was much more variety and depth than in Royal Rumble. The grappling system with strength meters created genuine tension during the locks, and each wrestler finally had unique moves and appropriate finishers. WWF Royal Rumble is a true milestone in 90s wrestling games, representing the golden era when the WWE, then WWF, dominated both television and video games. This game perfectly captured the essence of what made professional wrestling so captivating at the time. The unique personality of each wrestler, the iconic special moves, and that unique atmosphere of spectacle that only the WWF knew how to create. For those who grew up watching wrestling shows on open TV, playing Royal Rumble was like having direct access to the ring, controlling their favorite heroes and villains. The gameplay of WWF Royal Rumble was revolutionary for its time, offering relatively simple but effective controls that allowed both novices and veterans to have fun. The command system was intuitive enough that anyone could execute the basic moves, but it had enough depth to reward those who dedicated time to mastering the nuances of each character. Each wrestler had their own set of special moves that really lived up to their television personas. From The Undertaker's devastating tombstone piledriver to Bret Hart's technical moves. The Royal Rumble mode itself was the big star of the game, offering a unique experience that no other fighting game of the time could replicate. The tension of being in the ring with multiple opponents trying to survive while new challengers entered at each interval created a dynamic completely different from traditional one-on-one matches. You needed strategy, perfect timing, and a bit of luck to emerge as the winner. The battles became epic, especially when you managed to eliminate your rivals dramatically, or when you were the underdog who managed to survive against all odds. My first experience with WWF WrestleFest was in a noisy arcade, and the machine stood out in the crowd. The sprites were huge, colorful, and full of personality, something that home consoles of the time simply couldn't replicate. The feeling of controlling such caricatured and vibrant versions of legends like Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, and Legion of Doom was surreal. The sound was another differential, with digitized voices announcing the wrestlers' names and grunts with each blow. It was an audio-visual spectacle made to attract attention and swallow tokens. The gameplay was the definition of easy to learn, difficult to master. With just 2 buttons, one for attack and one for grab, anyone could start playing immediately. However, the depth came from timing, positioning, and the intelligent use of the scenario. The tag team mechanics were the heart of the game. Being able to make a hot tag for your partner to enter the ring with everything, or seeing opponents interfering illegally, created a team dynamic that was unprecedented and extremely fun, especially playing in pairs with a friend. What really made WrestleFest shine was its presentation. Developed by Technos Japan, the same as Double Dragon, the game had an unmistakable art style. The animations were exaggerated in a way that perfectly captured the spectacle of pro wrestling. The finishers, like Hogan's leg drop, had a visual and sound impact that made each hit rewarding. The roster was a dream team from the golden era of the WWF, and seeing them all together in a single game was any fan's dream. The game offered 2 main modes. The Saturday night's main event was a gauntlet mode where you, in pairs, faced all the other teams to become champion. The Royal Rumble mode was a frenetic version of the classic fight, where the objective was to survive a constant attack from new opponents.
Now go for the next match!
many of us in the West, Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 was a kind of legend. It was the Japanese game that served as the basis for the WCW and WWF classics on the Nintendo 64. I managed to play it through import, and it was a revealing experience. Without the well-known WCW licenses, the game focused purely on mechanics, and this is where it shined. The feeling of control was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't about pressing buttons quickly, but about rhythm, timing, and strategy. The AKI, now Sin Sophia grappling system, was the great revolution. A quick tap on the grab button initiated a weak grapple, while holding the button resulted in a strong grapple. From there, a combination of directional and buttons executed a vast range of movements. This mechanic forced the player to think like a real wrestler, starting with weaker blows to wear down the opponent before attempting the higher impact moves. It was a deep, intuitive, and incredibly rewarding system. Graphically, the game was identical to WCW vs. NWO World Tour, using the same character models and animations. What set it apart was its gigantic roster, which was a true who's who of Japanese and international wrestling at the time, although with altered names for licensing reasons. We had versions of Mitsuharu Misawa, Kenta Kobashi, and even Emma fighters like Rickson Gracie. For a more dedicated fan, it was a playground of dream matches that Western games couldn't offer. The amount of content was impressive. There were several belts to compete for in different leagues, and each wrestler possessed an arsenal of moves so extensive that it was possible to play for dozens of hours and still discover new animations. Power Move Pro Wrestling, known in Japan as Tukan Retsuden, was my first foray into 3D wrestling games on the PlayStation. It had a very different approach from the American games of the time. The pace was slower, more deliberate, trying to simulate the style of Japanese pro wrestling, Puroresu, which is more focused on the sporting aspect and the psychology within the ring. This was fascinating, as it seemed less like an arcade fighting game and more like a combat simulator. The gameplay was unique and required patience. The system was based on precise timing to apply and reverse blows. One of the most striking mechanics was the localized damage system. You could focus your attacks on a specific part of the opponent's body, such as a leg or an arm, and this would have a visible effect on their performance. If you damaged a wrestler's leg, he would start to limp and have difficulty applying moves that required strength in the legs. This layer of strategy was deep and far ahead of its time. Visually, for a 1996 game, Power Move Pro Wrestling was quite competent. The 3D models of the characters were a bit blocky, as was common in the first generation of PS1 games, but the animations were the strong point. The moves were captured from real wrestlers from New Japan Pro Wrestling, and this translated into suplexes, strikes, and submissions that seemed authentic and impactful. The overall presentation was more sober, without the pyrotechnics of the WWF, focusing on the action within the ring. The roster was composed entirely of NJPW stars, such as Jushin Thunder Liger, Shinya Hashimoto, and the Great Muta, although the names were changed in the American version. For those who followed the Japanese scene, it was a feast. The game also had a wrestler creation mode that, for the time, was incredibly robust, allowing you to adjust appearance, attributes, and, most importantly, a vast set of moves.
Break it up. 1, 2. 5 minutes. Break it up.
WWF War Zone marked the arrival of the Attitude Era on consoles in an explosive way. My first impression was of shock. The 3D graphics, the movement captured from real athletes, and mainly the complete entrances with video on the screen, in the PS1 version, were out of this world. The game screamed attitude in every menu and in every detail. It was dark, daring, and seemed adult, perfectly reflecting the change in tone that the WWF was experiencing on TV. The gameplay was a total break from what Acclaim did before. The grappling system was complex, based on button sequences that seemed to come out of a fighting game like Mortal Kombat. To apply a DDT, for example, you needed a combination like left-right punch button. This created a steep learning curve. In the beginning, it was frustrating, but once you memorized the commands of your favorite wrestler, the feeling of control was immense. The system, despite being divisive, was ambitious. The presentation was the flagship. The character models were impressive for the time, capturing the features of Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, and Mankind with a level of detail never before seen in a WWF game. The audio was also a highlight, with commentary from Jim Ross and Vince McMahon, and taunts recorded by the wrestlers themselves. Hearing Stone Cold shout, "And that's the bottom line, 'cause Stone Cold said so," after a victory was the height of immersion. Warzone was one of the pioneers in the wrestler creation mode as we know it today. The Create a Wrestler was incredibly deep for 1998, allowing you to customize everything from physical type to moveset, name, and entrance theme. In addition, the game offered a variety of match types, including cage match, weapons match, and the challenge mode, where you climbed the ranking to become WWF champion.
Locking horns now. Locked together. Shawn Michaels is in a bad spot now.
I don't plan on quitting. Maybe you should.
Let's go, Brad! Shawn on the floor becoming fast friend. The fans have totally lost it. They want more. He's not getting up. His eyes are glazed over. Nicely done. Arm drag. Let's get it on. With hip toss. Shawn Michaels is seeing star. He's a sitting duck. Here's the tie-up. Look at the carnage in the ring.
Drop you on that stack of dimes, you call a neck.
Locked together. Austin is unrelenting. There's no mercy.
Released just a year after Warzone, WWF Attitude seemed less like a sequel and more like the definitive version of that game vision. The feeling I had when playing it for the first time was of familiarity, but with everything expanded. The base was the same, but the roster was gigantic. The creation mode was even more robust, and there were more match types. It was War Zone raised to the nth power, the complete package of the Attitude Era at its peak. The gameplay maintained the controversial combo system from War Zone. Acclaim didn't change the core formula, but refined it. The controls seemed a little more responsive, and collision detection was improved, resulting in fewer frustrating moments. The big leap of Attitude was in the content. The Create a Wrestler mode was phenomenal for $19.99, offering an absurd amount of options for appearance, clothing, and moves. The addition of a Create a Stable and Create a Pay-Per-View mode gave players tools to build their own WWF universe. The roster was massive, including practically all the important names of the time, from D-Generation X to the Corporation. The number of match types was also expanded, with the inclusion of I Quit and Falls Count Anywhere. The presentation continued to be the strong point. In the Dreamcast version, in particular, the graphics were noticeably sharper and cleaner. The wrestlers' entrances were even more elaborate, and the overall atmosphere of the game perfectly captured the televised chaos of the late 90s. The career mode was expanded, offering a more structured path to conquer all the belts from the European to the WWF title, adding a clear objective for the solo player.
Lock together. He's down. Hurry, get up. He had this one in the bag. What an idiot. Locked up. Commissioner Slaughter falters. Commissioner Slaughter, shaking up a bit there. Slaughter him!
WCW vs. NWO World Tour was the game that changed everything for me. After years of playing Acclaim's 2D games, taking control of the Nintendo 64 and experiencing the AKI system was a revelation. The freedom of movement in the 3D ring, the physics of the bodies, and above all the grappling system were revolutionary. I remember spending hours just experimenting with the moves, marveling at how the game responded so intuitively and realistically. The gameplay was pure gold. The presentation of the game was functional, but the focus was clearly the gameplay. The character models were a bit generic, especially in the faces, but they were easily recognizable by their clothes and animations. The great trump card was the roster, which was divided between WCW and NWO, perfectly capturing the main plot that dominated television at the time. Having the option to fight for a faction, with names like Hollywood Hogan and Sting, was a big draw. In terms of modes, World Tour was a bit basic compared to its successors. There were the exhibition modes and the championships, which were essentially a gauntlet against a series of opponents to conquer belts from different fictional federations, representing different fighting styles from around the world. The multiplayer for up to 4 players, however, was where the game became legendary. The game sessions with friends were chaotic, competitive, and unforgettable. WCW vs. NWO World Tour was the patient zero of the best crop of wrestling games ever created. It introduced the A-Key game engine to the Western public, which would become the gold standard of the genre for years. Although it has been surpassed in every aspect by its successor, World Tour has a special place in history for being the first courageous step in a new direction. It proved that wrestling games could be deep, strategic, and incredibly fun. Saturday Night Slam Masters was the result of what happened when a fighting game giant like Capcom decided to make a wrestling game. And the result was exactly what was expected. Vibrant, exaggerated, and with incredibly solid gameplay. I remember seeing it in the arcade and being impressed with the giant sprites and the art style that was pure Capcom, with characters designed by Tetsuo Hara, the artist of Fist of the North Star. It wasn't a simulator, it was a wrestling spectacle. The gameplay took elements from Street Fighter II and applied them to wrestling. The commands were simple, with buttons for attack, grab, and jump, but the execution of special moves required directional commands, like a quarter circle plus button. This gave the game a familiar feeling for any fighting game fan, but within the context of a ring. The action was fast, the blows had a satisfying impact, and the pace was much more arcade-like than that of other wrestling games of the time. The presentation was the highlight. The characters were original and charismatic creations, like Biff Slamkovich and the iconic mayor of Metro City, Mike Hager, from Final Fight. Each wrestler had a unique design and a set of moves that reflected their personality. The arenas were full of life, and the audience reacted to every big move. The overall aesthetic was colorful and energetic, far from the realism that other games sought. It was a video game in its purest and most fun form. Saturday Night Slam Masters occupies a unique place in the pantheon of wrestling games. It didn't stick to the rules or realism, preferring to focus on immediate fun and spectacular action. It was a fighting game disguised as a wrestling game, and this fusion of genres worked perfectly. It's a classic that demonstrates Capcom's versatility and offers an experience that, even today, is incredibly fun to play, especially with friends.
Mexico.